Christmas morning had its own menu, the same every year, and that was exactly the point. There was a specific kind of darkness on Christmas morning that didn't exist on any other day of the year. Not the heavy, ordinary darkness of a Tuesday in November when you pulled the covers tighter and let yourself sink back into sleep. This was a luminous darkness, a waiting darkness. The kind that pressed against your eyelids with something that felt almost like electricity, that had you awake before the alarm, before the light, before even the birds, awake and listening, perfectly still, for the first sign that the world had kept its promise again. You knew before you opened your eyes. You knew in the way you know things at 8 years old without yet having the language to explain why you know them. Something was different. Something in the air of the house itself was different. Something had arrived in the night. And then you opened your eyes, and there it was, that faint, warm glow coming from down the hall. Not the gray pre-dawn light that filtered through curtains on regular mornings, pressing against closed blinds in the pale, indifferent way of ordinary days. This was something colored, something amber and green and red and blue, soft and pulsing, alive in a way that only Christmas tree lights were alive. The big C7 and C9 bulbs, not the tiny white lights of later decades, not the blinking LED strings of a world that hadn't been invented yet, but the generous, warm, wide-spaced bulbs that your father strung carefully along the branches every year, checking each one before he plugged them in. Those bulbs threw warm pools of color across the tinsel and the glass ornaments and the presents stacked beneath the branches, casting the whole living room in something that felt less like electricity and more like enchantment. It spilled through the doorway and down the hall and under your bedroom door and into your room, and it found you before you were ready. And you were out of bed before you knew you'd decided to get up. And then the smell found you. It came before any sound, before any voice called your name, or any adult footstep crossed the kitchen floor. It moved under the bedroom door and down the hall like a quiet announcement, an invisible signal that the most important morning of the year had officially begun. Coffee first, the deep, dark, rich smell of percolating coffee that meant the adults were awake and the day was real, that the world had not made you wait alone in the dark for nothing. The percolator on the counter, working its rhythmic, reliable way through the grounds. Its sound like a quiet heartbeat. Its smell like the official declaration that Christmas had started. And then, threading through the coffee, and above it, and all around it, something warmer, sweeter. Cinnamon. Brown sugar beginning to caramelize somewhere warm. The faint, yeasty promise of dough that had been rising since the night before, that was now meeting the heat of the oven and transforming into the most specific, most irreplaceable smell in your entire childhood. And beneath it all, constant and grounding and clean, the smell of the Christmas tree itself. That sharp, resinous, green smell of pine or fir that meant December and family and home in a way that no candle manufacturer has ever fully replicated, no matter how hard they've tried. Do you remember what it felt like to be the first one up? To stand in the hall in your flannel pajamas, the cold floor, boards under your bare feet, and have all of that smell come to you at once. The coffee, the cinnamon, the pine, while the colored tree light held the living room in its quiet glow, and the house was still, and the carols hadn't started yet. Do you remember just standing there for a moment, in the hall, taking the whole thing in? Every family had a different rule about what could be done before breakfast, and in some houses, that rule was the most important law of the day. In houses where the rule was lenient, the stockings were fair game from the moment the first child's feet hit the cold floor. You could drag your stocking from the fireplace or the hook by the door and carry it to the couch and begin pulling things from it with both hands in the dark, the tangerine or orange tucked into the toe, the walnuts and pecans in their shells, the candy cane, the small toy or game or book that had appeared there overnight by the same quiet miracle that had filled the space under the tree. Those could be examined and marveled over in hushed, whispered voices while the parents gathered themselves and the kitchen began to come to life. But the presents under the tree, the good ones, the wrapped ones, the ones in bright paper tied with curling ribbon and labeled in your mother's handwriting, those waited. Those were held in trust by breakfast, which served as the gate, the ceremony of passage, The thing that had to happen first before anything else could be real. And there was one thing on the table that appeared only on Christmas morning, and if it wasn't there, the day felt incomplete, though no one ever said why. You might not be able to name it right now, exactly. It wasn't necessarily the most impressive dish. It wasn't the most elaborate thing your mother made. It wasn't even the thing you would describe first if someone asked you about your Christmas morning breakfast. But it was the thing that meant Christmas morning and no other morning, the detail that made the table recognizably itself, the element without which something fundamental would have been missing from the day, even if no one could quite explain what that missing thing was. We will come back to that, because by the time this morning is over, you'll know exactly what it was. You've always known. But first, the kitchen, in the year 1965, in a house somewhere in Ohio or Minnesota or Virginia or Georgia, a father was up before his children had any idea he was awake. He had crept out of bed without waking his wife. Or perhaps she was already up, was already in the kitchen before him, already had the oven preheating, and he had gone first to the living room. He stood in front of the tree for a moment in the dark before he plugged it in, and then he plugged it in and the room filled with color, and he stood there a moment longer, looking at it before making his way to the kitchen. His bathrobe, his slippers on the linoleum, his glasses, which he'd remembered to put on before he left the bedroom, slightly fogged already from the warmth that was beginning to build in the kitchen. He measured the coffee with the same quiet deliberateness he measured everything else. He filled the percolator pot. He plugged it in, and then he stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the outside. Dark still. The neighbor's house unlit. Maybe snow on the ground, or maybe just the frost-gray lawn of December. And he breathed, and he listened for the sound of children's feet above him or down the hall, and then he got to work. She was in her housecoat and slippers, her hair not yet done for the day, her face still soft from sleep and slightly flushed from the oven's warmth, and she had been thinking about this morning in a certain quiet, organized way since the week before Thanksgiving. The cinnamon rolls had been started the night before, the dough mixed and kneaded and set to rise in the refrigerator overnight, to be pulled out in the early morning dark and shaped and set to rise again before baking. Or the breakfast casserole had been assembled the previous evening, eggs beaten with milk, sausage browned and cooled, bread torn into cubes, cheese grated. Everything layered in the glass baking dish and covered with foil and set in the refrigerator overnight, ready to go straight into the oven this morning. She slid it in now with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this exact thing on this exact morning for more years than she could easily count. Her glasses fogged slightly from the oven's open warmth. She wiped them on her housecoat without looking, without breaking her rhythm, closed the oven door, set the timer, turned to the orange juice. What was on your Christmas morning table depended entirely on where you were in the country and who had taught your mother to cook and what your family had decided in the first Christmases of its existence was the right way to do this. In the kitchens of the Midwest and the East, the Christmas morning table was a particular, familiar kind of abundance. Scrambled eggs made with a touch of cream, done in butter in the good skillet. Bacon crisped in the iron pan, or sausage links browned until they were deep, mahogany, and split slightly along one side, releasing their fragrance into the kitchen air. Toast from white sandwich bread, or from a homemade loaf, if your mother was a bread baker, spread with softened butter that melted immediately into the warm surface, and then layered with strawberry jam. The good jam, the one that came in the heavy glass jar, not the everyday kind. Orange juice poured into the good glasses, the ones with the slight weight and clarity that distinguished them from the everyday tumblers. Coffee for the adults, in the Christmas mugs with the holly pattern or the gold rim. Milk for the younger children, or hot chocolate. Cocoa made on the stove, not from a packet, with real cocoa powder and milk, heated slowly until it steamed. Poured into mugs and topped with a few of the small marshmallows that lived in the cabinet for exactly this occasion. And over everything, woven through everything, insistent and triumphant and completely specific, the smell of something baking. The cinnamon rolls, the coffee cake, the smell that meant this morning and no other. Can you smell it right now? Not the idea of it, the actual smell. The way it came out of the oven and moved through the kitchen and into the hall and found you wherever you were in the house. A warm, sweet, yeasty, cinnamon brown sugar announcement that could not be ignored and was never, not once in all those years, unwelcome. In the South, the Christmas morning table spoke a different, equally precise language. Biscuits, real biscuits, rolled and cut with the rim of a drinking glass, and baked until the tops were deep, burnished gold, and the interiors were soft as clouds, piled in a cloth-lined basket. Country ham, thick-sliced and pan-fried, its saltiness sharp and perfect against the richness of everything else. Sausage gravy made the proper way, with the drippings from the pan and whole milk and black pepper, ladled generously over split biscuits in a gesture of warmth that was also a statement about how Christmas morning should feel. Grits cooked low and slow, finished with a substantial knob of butter that pooled in the center as it melted, softening and enriching the whole bowl. Red-eye gravy made from the country ham's pan, drippings and black coffee, poured over the ham or the biscuit or both, and sometimes placed beside the biscuit on the plate like a small citrus ornament. A fresh orange, peeled and sectioned carefully, bright and cold against all that warm saltiness, because in the South in the 1960s, fresh oranges in December were still a small luxury, still a sign that this morning was different, still a gesture of generosity that the children understood without being told what it meant. In Catholic households, Christmas morning arrived, carrying its own particular weight. Many families had been to midnight mass the night before, a late, extraordinary hour, the church full of candlelight and incense, and the particular solemnity of that liturgy. The children allowed to stay up past any ordinary bedtime and aware of the privilege, and the Christmas morning breakfast was a kind of gentle, domestic counterpart to that ceremony. Sometimes it was the breakfast casserole, assembled the night before and put in the oven first thing, the cheese melting and browning, while the family moved from the bedroom to the kitchen in their robes. Sometimes it was pastries and sweet breads, bought from the Italian bakery or the German one, depending on the neighborhood, brought home in white paper bags and set out on the Christmas plates. Sometimes it was a coffee cake that had taken an afternoon to make and appeared only on this morning and no other, a recipe in someone's grandmother's handwriting on an index card that was taken out every December and put back every January. In Scandinavian households in Minnesota and Wisconsin and the Dakotas, the Christmas morning table might hold something even more specific. A cardamom bread, braided and golden, its sweetness carrying the warm, faintly exotic note of spice that was the taste of the old country. Kringle, that wide, flaky Danish pastry, layers of buttery dough folded over almond paste, or a fruit filling, pulling apart in long, tender strips when you broke it. Rice pudding with an almond hidden somewhere inside, and the person who found the almond in their bowl won a small prize, a tradition so embedded in the rhythm of those mornings that children ate slowly and carefully, moving the pudding around the bowl with a spoon, watching for the smooth white shape hidden in the white cream. And for the elders, sometimes a small dish of pickled herring alongside their coffee, a link to the old country that the children politely declined, but that the grandparents received with the quiet satisfaction of people who had found their particular things still in place. In Jewish households, where the secular traditions of Christmas had been adopted, the tree, the presents, the morning of gifts, the breakfast might follow its own different logic. Bagels and lox laid out on the good platter, cream cheese and capers. The things that were Jewish food in the way that cinnamon rolls were Christmas food, combined with a December morning in a particular way that was entirely their own. Or blintzes filled with sweet farmer's cheese, pan-fried in butter until the edges turned golden. Or simply an American breakfast alongside the tree, eggs and toast and coffee, the same as any family, with the Christmas plates and the Christmas cloth making it specific. But the cinnamon roll. Let us stay with the cinnamon roll for a moment, because in house after house, across the country and across the decade, the thing that most precisely meant Christmas morning, the one thing that answered the question we raised at the beginning of this morning, was the cinnamon roll. Not the most impressive dish, not the most photographed or the most remarked upon, but the one that, if it were absent, would have made the morning feel fundamentally wrong. Some mothers had made them from scratch every year without exception, the dough begun the night before, the yeast proofed in warm water in a bowl on the counter. the flour measured and worked in, the dough kneaded until it was smooth and elastic and alive, set to rise in the refrigerator overnight. In the early dark of Christmas morning, she would take the dough from the refrigerator and let it come to room temperature, then roll it out on the floured board into a long, wide rectangle, spread it thickly with softened butter, coated in a mixture of cinnamon and brown sugar that she pressed gently into the butter with the flat of her hand, roll it into a log, cut it into thick rounds, and place them in the buttered pan. Then the second rise, while the family was waking up and the coffee was percolating and the bacon was going in the pan. Then the oven. Then the smell that found you wherever you were in the house. Others relied on the refrigerator tubes, the Pillsbury rolls that came in a cylindrical cardboard and foil container with a seam along one side. And if you pressed the seam with a spoon, the whole thing would pop with a satisfying crack, and the dough would unfurl from inside, preformed and ready for the pan. These were not the same as the scratch rolls. Everyone knew they were not the same. They were slightly denser, slightly less complex, with a sweeter, more uniform flavor and a different texture. But on Christmas morning, even they carried the smell, that cinnamon sugar butter smell, coming from the oven, filling the kitchen, announcing the morning. And that smell was enough. That smell was the thing. You probably haven't smelled that exact combination, coffee, bacon, cinnamon, pine, in 30 years. But right now, you can. Close your eyes for a moment if you like. The percolator is going on the counter, its warm, rhythmic sound filling the quiet kitchen. Bacon is in the iron skillet, starting to release its fragrance into the cold morning air. The oven is on, and from its seals comes the warm, sweet, yeasty cloud of rolls baking, the sugar beginning to caramelize against the bottom of the pan, the dough puffing and browning, the whole kitchen filling with something that is more than just smell. It is safety. It is belonging. It is the specific, irreplaceable sensation of being in the right place at the right time, of being a child in your home on Christmas morning, in your flannel pajamas, with the tree lights glowing through the doorway and the carols about to start on the radio, and of knowing, without needing anyone to tell you, that this is exactly where you are supposed to be, and that nothing, not even the presence in the living room, can make you more certain of that than this smell, right now, filling your lungs in the dark kitchen of your childhood. The table was different on Christmas morning, not only in what it held, but in what it was, in its nature and its intention. The everyday tablecloth, or the bare table for families who used the kitchen table uncovered on ordinary mornings, was replaced by the Christmas tablecloth. Red or green, most often, or sometimes plaid, the plaid one that had been bought the year. The kitchen was redone and had stayed ever since, becoming more Christmas than the kitchen itself. Some families had tablecloths that had come from grandmothers. Linen with embroidered edges, hem-stitched by hand, taken out carefully every December, laundered and pressed before use with a deliberateness that matched the day. The napkins were cloth, because this was not a paper napkin morning. The good dishes came down from the high shelf, not the everyday stoneware, but the china, or the set that had been a wedding gift and was used only on the days when days needed to be marked, or the Christmas plates with the village scene and the gold rim that never went in the dishwasher and never got chipped because they were handled as the precious things they were. At the center of the table, candles in brass, holders perhaps, or a small arrangement of evergreen cuttings in a low bowl, or a ceramic figurine of the Nativity, or simply the red pillar candle that appeared every December and was never lit except on mornings like this. What was on your Christmas morning table, every single year without fail? What made the table into the Christmas table? Was it something your mother always set out, something she did without thinking because she had always done it? Was there a specific dish, a specific serving bowl, a specific platter that only came out on Christmas and made you feel, just by seeing it on the counter, that everything was about to begin? The children came to the table reluctantly. That is the honest truth of it. And every parent who lived through those mornings knows it without being told. The children had been awake for hours by the time the breakfast was ready, had excavated their stockings in whispered conspiratorial excitement, had circled the tree, had examined the wrapped presents with their fingers, had lifted and shaken the boxes that might be toys. They had been living in the outer atmosphere of Christmas morning for what felt like forever, and now they were being called to the table. Now they were being asked to sit down and eat before the real morning could begin, and they came because they had to, because she was firm on this point every year. But they came like people arriving at a formal ceremony they would have preferred to skip, with a certain reluctant grace, their eyes already past the table and into the living room, where the tree stood in its colored glory, with the presents at its feet. Do you remember sitting at that table as a child, fork tapping against the plate with an impatience you couldn't quite suppress, your eyes fixed on the living room doorway, straining to see the wrapped packages? Do you remember the feeling of the good plate in your hands, heavier than the everyday plates, its Christmas pattern familiar and beloved, and how even the weight of it felt significant, felt like ceremony? Felt like this morning was different from all other mornings in a way that went beyond the presents. She held firm. Every year, without exception, she held firm. The mother in her housecoat and slippers, her face flushed from the oven's warmth, pleasantly exhausted in that particular way of someone who has been quietly holding a large and beautiful thing together. She would not be moved on this point. Breakfast before presents. Everyone sat. Everyone ate. The rolls were warm. The juice was cold. The coffee was poured. The carols played from the other room. This was the order of things, and the order of things was not subject to negotiation, and the children knew it, and in the small, honest part of themselves they didn't examine too closely. They were glad for it. Only decades later, standing in their own kitchens, in their own robes, on their own children's Christmas mornings, would they understand what the breakfast had actually been for? It was not about nutrition. It was not simply about routine. It was about the pause, the forced, collective, irreplaceable pause before the chaos arrived. It was the last moment of Christmas morning when the gifts were still unwrapped and the anticipation was still whole and intact, when the family was still gathered in one room around one table, sharing one meal, present to each other in the specific, unhurried way that only this kind of ritual makes possible. In some houses, before the first fork was lifted, there was grace, not the brisk, rote grace of a weekday morning, but something longer and quieter, a prayer that matched the weight of the day. Sometimes it was the father who said it, his voice in the early morning kitchen carrying a different quality than his weekday voice. Sometimes it was a grandparent, visiting for Christmas, who had arrived the night before with a covered dish and a suitcase, and the particular smell of a different house on their coat, and who now sat at the Christmas table with the children and the adults, and offered the blessing in a voice that was older and more certain than any other voice in the room. When the grandparent said grace on Christmas morning, the room went still, in a way it did at no other moment of the day. Hands folded, heads bowed. The children, who could barely hold themselves in their chairs at any other point in the morning, went perfectly quiet. And in the space of that stillness, in the held breath before the Amen, you could hear the percolator still working quietly on the counter, and the carols coming softly from the radio in the next room, and the faint hum of the tree lights, and perhaps the tick of the kitchen clock, and outside the window, the deep, particular silence of early Christmas morning in a world that was still mostly asleep. The music was there from the beginning. It was always there, and it was always the same music, and it was always at exactly the right volume, not so loud that it demanded attention, not so quiet that it disappeared, but present the way the best things are present, running just beneath the surface of everything else, giving the morning its tone, its undertone, its sense of being anchored in something larger than itself. On the radio, the local station had been playing Christmas music since the 1st of December, and on Christmas morning it went without interruption from before dawn until well into the afternoon. Bing Crosby's voice, warm and unhurried, with that amber, slightly burnished quality that seemed to belong specifically to winter mornings in domestic spaces, drifted through the kitchen while the eggs were scrambled and the bacon was turned in the pan. Nat King Cole, whose voice had a precision and a tenderness that made you feel he was singing specifically to you, specifically on this morning, specifically in this kitchen. Perry Como, Andy Williams, and if your family had a record player, which by the mid-1960s many families did, you might have had the album out since the night before, already on the turntable, the Andy Williams Christmas album, or the Nat King Cole Christmas Songs album, or Bing Crosby's White Christmas, the label soft with wear from being played every December, and some adult moving quietly through the living room on their way to the kitchen, would have set the needle at the beginning again. The warm crackle of the vinyl before the first note, that specific, irreproducible sound, that too was Christmas morning. At some point during the breakfast, the camera would appear. A Kodak Instamatic, most likely, small and rectangular, loaded with the Magicube flash cube that rotated to a fresh bulb after each shot, leaving a brief, faintly acrid smell of burned powder in the air after the flash. The father was usually the one holding it, appearing at the kitchen doorway with the camera raised, catching the children mid-bite, or holding up their stockings, or simply sitting at the table with the breakfast spread visible in the background. The Christmas tablecloth, the steam rising from the coffee cups, the rolls still in the pan on the counter. Some families had a Polaroid by the later part of the decade, the camera that produced its pictures slowly, the white square emerging from the front slot, the image developing in someone's palm while the family watched it appear, the colors resolving themselves from a ghost of gray into the specific, vivid record of that morning. That table, those faces, those photographs still exist, in albums, in shoeboxes, in the backs of drawers, in houses that have changed hands twice since then. If you have one of those photographs, one of those Christmas morning photographs from the 1960s, with its characteristic warmth and its slightly overexposed backgrounds and the faces of people who were younger then than you are now, take it out sometime and look at it carefully, not at the faces you already know by heart, but at the table in the background. Look at the tablecloth. Look at what's on the counter. Look at the way the kitchen was arranged, at the window and what's outside it, at the plates and cups and the particular quality of the early morning light. Look at your mother's hand, partially visible at the edge of the frame, because she was always the one setting something down or picking something up, always in motion, always making the morning happen while someone else held the camera. And then look at your own face. Do you remember being that child at that table, in those pajamas, on that specific morning? Can you feel what it felt like? The breakfast was not eaten quickly. This, too, was part of its nature. Even the most impatient child, the one whose eyes never fully left the living room doorway, the one whose fork tapped impatiently between bites, ate more slowly on Christmas morning than on any other, because the food was specific and warm and demanded to be experienced, and because even at 7 or 8 years old, some part of you understood that eating quickly would make the breakfast shorter, and the shorter the breakfast, the sooner the morning would move into its next phase, and some part of you wanted to stay in this phase just a little longer than you were willing to admit. The cinnamon roll on your plate, warm, the icing melting slowly into the spirals of dough, releasing one more concentrated wave of cinnamon sugar fragrance as the first bite broke its surface, could not be rushed. The first bite was something you took seriously, even as a child, even without understanding why. The taste was specific, sweet and warm, with that particular richness of butter that had been rolled into the dough and then baked into it until it caramelized at the edges, the dough itself soft and pulling apart in layers, the cinnamon dark and fragrant in the center of each spiral, where it had concentrated most. She made the same thing every year, and every year it was exactly what you wanted. The orange juice was poured into the good glasses. Not the everyday tumblers, but the ones with a slight weight and clarity to them. The ones that made orange juice feel like a small ceremony, like something worth pausing over. In houses where the oranges were fresh, someone had halved them the night before and worked them over the glass juicer until the pitcher was full, the foam rising on the surface, the smell of fresh citrus, sharp and vivid in the kitchen air. In houses where the orange juice came from the frozen concentrate can, and many did in the early 1960s because fresh oranges were still a small luxury in many parts of the country, it had been mixed carefully and set in the refrigerator to chill, and it was poured cold and bright into the good glasses, and tasted sharp and sweet and entirely right. The adults drank their coffee from the Christmas mugs. The children had their milk or their cocoa. And for this one meal, on this one morning, everyone's cup or glass was something slightly special, slightly elevated, carrying the quiet ceremony of the day in its weight and its pattern. No one ever said thank you for the breakfast. It was too much a part of the day to need thanks. This is perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about it. The Christmas morning breakfast did not occupy the same emotional territory as a gift, where gratitude was explicitly called for and expected and pleasurably given. It existed in a different register entirely, the register of the given, the expected, the certain. It was the fixed point around which the entire morning arranged itself. It derived its power from its repetition, from the knowledge that it had always been this and would always be this, from the quiet, unspoken covenant between the family and the morning that this table, on this day, would look and smell and taste exactly like it always had. A child doesn't understand this consciously, but a child feels it, feels the safety of it, feels the way the sameness of the table is a kind of promise that this family is intact, that this morning is real, that Christmas has come again, and you are in it, and you are held, and you are exactly where you are meant to be. Think about what that sameness meant in the specific context of the 1960s. In a decade that had moved fast from the very beginning, through television and the space race and the civil rights movement and political assassinations and Vietnam and all the rest. Through change after change after change that arrived, whether you were ready for it or not. The Christmas morning table was a place that did not change. The same tablecloth, pressed and laid, the same rolls, smelling the same way, the same specific arrangement of orange juice and eggs and coffee and cinnamon, the same carols on the same record, the same mugs, the same plates, the same ritual of sitting down together in your pajamas in the early morning before the presents, before the day. In a world that was being reinvented every few years, the Christmas morning table stayed itself, and this was not accidental. It was not the result of failure of imagination. It was the most intentional, most loving thing. The decision, made again each year without discussion, to keep this one thing exactly as it had always been. Do you remember the exact order of your Christmas morning? Stockings first, then breakfast, then presents. Or did your family have its own rhythm? Was there negotiation, year after year, between the children's urgency and the mother's firm insistence on the proper sequence? And looking back now, looking back from this distance, from this quiet place, can you see that the sequence itself was the point? That the morning was designed by the people who made it happen to build and hold and delay and finally release, so that by the time the presents were opened, everything that surrounded them, the smell, the taste, the carols, the table, the family gathered together, had made them more precious than any gift could be on its own. There was a year, in some houses, when something about the breakfast was different, not dramatically, not in any way that required acknowledgement or formal apology, but something was slightly missing or slightly wrong. The cinnamon rolls, perhaps, hadn't risen properly, because the kitchen had been too cold the night before, or the yeast had been old, and she had had to make the refrigerator tube rolls as a substitute, and everyone ate them cheerfully and said they were delicious and were not lying. Exactly. But were also aware of a small, specific absence that no one named. Or the Christmas tablecloth had developed a stain in the wash, and a different one had been pressed into service, and it was perfectly fine, a perfectly good tablecloth. But it was the wrong one, and everyone could feel it. Or the grandmother, who always made the coffee cake, was ill that year and couldn't make the drive, and her coffee cake didn't come. And no one made anything to replace it, because no one knew the recipe or thought to ask for it until the morning it was missing. And the family ate, and the breakfast was good, and the day unfolded in its usual way. But something was subtly, fundamentally off. The way a chord played with one note missing is still a chord, but isn't quite right. And later, not at the table, but in the living room, someone said it quietly, almost to themselves, "Next year, it needs to be the same." And the next year it was. And now, the one thing on the table that appeared only on Christmas morning. You know what it is. You've known since the first paragraph, haven't you? It came to you without effort. That specific image, that specific taste, it surfaced from wherever memories like this are kept and floated quietly into your awareness the moment you were asked to look for it. For some of you, it was the cinnamon rolls. Always the cinnamon rolls, your mother's recipe. The index card in her handwriting still in someone's kitchen drawer. For others, it was the ambrosia, that beautiful, uncomplicated combination of canned mandarin oranges and shredded coconut and mini marshmallows, and perhaps some sour cream, served in the good glass bowl, appearing only at Christmas morning breakfast and never at any other meal, and tasting exactly like what it was, a sweet, festive, completely specific thing that existed only in December. For others, it was the coffee cake with the particular crumb topping, the streusel that collapsed into butter and cinnamon crumbles the moment the fork touched it. For others, the cardamom bread braided in its specific pattern, the red-eye gravy, the country ham, the Swedish rice pudding, the particular raspberry jam in the heavy glass jar, the good jam, the French kind, saved for this morning and no other. Whatever it was yours, entirely specifically, irreplaceably yours. And it made the table complete, and without it, the table would not have been the Christmas table. And with it, with exactly that thing in exactly that place on exactly that morning, the world was right. Eventually, the last forkful was eaten. The last sip taken. The roll plate was bare except for the gleaming residue of caramelized sugar. The coffee was refilled one final time. The children were already pushing their chairs back, already turning toward the living room, already incandescent with the anticipation that had been held, correctly and lovingly, in abeyance through the whole length of the breakfast. And the mother sat for a moment longer at the table. You might not have noticed this as a child, but you can see it now, her coffee cup warm in both hands, watching her family move away from the table and into the next phase of the morning. And her expression in that moment was something private and complete, something that did not need to be seen to be real. What followed was the particular wonderful chaos of Christmas morning in the living room. The torn paper accumulating in drifts on the floor, the ribbons saved or not saved, depending on the house. The exclamations of surprise and the long, quiet pauses of a child holding a gift that was exactly right, too right for words. The Lionel or Mark's train circling the base of the tree, its sound threading through the carols and the laughter and the paper, the camera flashing again from the kitchen doorway, someone trying on a new sweater over their pajamas and modeling it with the gravity of a fashion show. The breakfast, already becoming a memory, its smell still present in the kitchen, but receding now as the morning moved into its next register. And in the kitchen, the dishes waited in the sink, the Christmas plates rinsed but not washed yet. The cinnamon roll pan on the stove, the last traces of caramelized sugar hardening in the bottom in a pattern that could almost be read like writing if you looked at it in the right light. The Christmas mug with the holly pattern, sitting on the counter, half full, forgotten in the excitement. The tablecloth still on the table, slightly ruffled, still beautiful, still holding the shape of the morning that had happened on it. The smell remained. Coffee and cinnamon and pine and the faint bright ghost of orange. The smell of Christmas morning, lingering into the afternoon, into the day, into all the years that came after. The tree lights were still on. In the living room, amid the paper and the boxes and the children and their gifts, the colored C7 and C9 bulbs still glowed, red and green and amber and blue, throwing their warm light across the tinsel and the glass ornaments. The shiny bright balls reflecting the whole room back in their curved surfaces in miniature, the angel or star presiding at the top with steady, gentle dignity. The pine smell, which had been the first smell of the morning, remained beneath everything else, the background note against which all the other memories played and always would. Think about who was at that table. Not in the abstract, the specific faces. Your mother, in her housecoat, the particular color of it, something you can still see if you try. Your father, his glasses slightly fogged, pouring coffee with the quiet, practiced ease of someone who had poured coffee on this morning in this kitchen many times before and intended to many times again. A sibling or siblings in flannel pajamas, hair uncombed, faces bright with the morning, in a way that faces are only bright when they are very young and very certain of being loved. A grandparent visiting, grandmothers in house dresses, grandfathers in cardigan sweaters,
people who had made this morning for their own children in kitchens long ago, and now sat at yours with a quality of happiness that was different from the children's happiness, older, deeper, more aware of its own impermanence.
Aware that joy is most fully joy when there has been enough of it to know it doesn't last. Were they all there? Were there years when everyone was exactly present? Every face that belonged there at the table, all at once, all themselves? And were there years when someone was missing and the table arranged itself differently around the absence, the way water closes over a stone? When was the last Christmas morning everyone was there? And did we know, as we ate, that it would never be quite the same again? This is the question that arrives quietly at the end, in the space between the last sip of coffee and the sound of paper being torn in the living room. It doesn't demand an answer. It simply sits there, the way the most important questions sit, not requiring resolution, only acknowledgement, only the quiet willingness to let it be true. There is a particular moment in childhood, somewhere in the middle of one specific Christmas morning, though you can't know at the time which one it will be, when everything converges into a single perfect instant. The smell is exactly right. The tree lights are doing exactly what they always do. The carols are the right carols. The breakfast is the right breakfast. The faces around the table are all the faces that belong there, and for one unscheduled, unpredicted, unrepeatable moment, the morning becomes aware of itself. Not consciously, not in any way a child could name or describe, but some part of you registers it. Some part of you stores the image with a care and a precision that ordinary images don't receive. Some part of you knows, without knowing that it knows, that this is the thing, this moment, this table, this smell, these people, this morning. This is the thing that will last. You can still find it, in the smell of coffee and cinnamon together in someone else's kitchen, which is enough to stop you mid-step and hold you still for a second, your hand on the doorframe, before you know why. In Bing Crosby's voice coming from a speaker in a store in December. In the sight of a Christmas tree with colored bulbs, the old kind, the generous, warm kind, throwing their pools of amber and red and green across a dark room. The breakfast ended. It always ended the same way, with the movement toward the living room, the escalating noise of the morning in full swing, the dishes in the sink, the tablecloth slightly askew, the coffee mug left on the counter, and the mother who had made it all happen, who had thought about this morning in November and begun her preparations in December, and stood at the stove in the pre-dawn, dark in her housecoat, so that the breakfast would be ready. The table would be set, the morning would be itself, gathered the dishes and straightened the cloth and refilled her coffee one last time. And then she stood in the kitchen doorway with her mug, looking into the living room, where her family was assembled in the colored light, amid the paper and the joy and the specific beautiful noise of Christmas morning. And she held that image for a moment, quietly, without moving, because she knew, the way mothers always know, what she was looking at. She knew the value of it. She had made it appear, year after year, without anyone asking her to, without anyone fully understanding how much of herself she put into it. The breakfast, the table, the morning, the people. You can still taste it. The cinnamon roll, warm from the oven, the frosting soft and sweet against your tongue, the first sip of orange juice in the good glass, cold and bright and exactly right. The coffee smell moving through the house from the kitchen, anchoring everything. The carols playing low in the other room. The feel of the Christmas plate in your hands, heavier than the everyday plates. Its pattern familiar in the way that only deeply loved things are familiar. The cold floor under your bare feet on the way to the table. The warm bathrobe pulled tight in the pre-dawn chill. The tree lights, colored and glowing, spilling through the doorway while the dark morning held still outside the windows. And the whole house, the whole dear, specific, irreplaceable house, smelled of pine and cinnamon and coffee and belonging. You can still see the faces. You can still hear the carols. You can still feel the particular weight of that plate, that cup, that morning. And there is not a person alive who sat at that table, in those flannel pajamas, in that early dark, with those faces around them, and that food before them, and those carols playing, and that tree glowing, who would not give almost anything to sit there one more time, just once more, at that table, on that morning, with those people. The same breakfast, the same every year, and that was exactly the point.